Okay. All right. We're going live now, guys. Okay. We are live. Welcome, everybody, to the Queen's Podcast Lab Learning Seminar. My name is Joseph Cohen. I'm a professor in the sociology department here at Queen's College in the City University of New York and co-director of the Queen's Podcast Lab. This learning series connects content creators with acclaimed or aspiring content creators with acclaimed creators and researchers who have expertise related to content creation. And today we have a very interesting guest who's kind of a mix of both. I am joined by Jay Acunzo of Unthinkable Media and host of the podcast Unthinkable. He's not working in the academy, though. We were talking a little bit about how he should. He's an independent creator, but his content is a really interesting blend of what I describe as management theory meets the kind of creation and production related theories that they engage over in media studies in English, and a lot of great sort of personal management content too. And Jay, how would you describe the kind of work that you do or the kind of content that you make?
Yeah, it's funny, at the cocktail party, it's become a nightmare. Like, what do you do? I actually just say I'm a writer, and either people's eyes glaze over or they'll say, what do you write about? And I'll explain it. But honestly, it all comes back to the same mission, which is I want to help other people, other professionals make what matters most to their careers or their companies or their communities. There's a lot of copycat or repurpose thinking and work out there. There's a lot of folks just trying to get famous quick. There's a lot of people repurposing other ideas as their own. There's just all these problems. And some of it is well-meaning. I'm trying really hard, but I feel like I have this other gear to get to creatively and I can't. And being a pure creator as I am, and then having worked in the business world in many different capacities, I just see the marriage and how harmonious it can be when you build a business according to your values and use your creativity to do so, to serve your audience, not just yourself. And so I'm trying to help people do that through all the work that I'm doing, which we can get into.
Yeah, totally. It's like you have a very interesting body of work that engages the kinds of questions that we see students and aspiring creators grappling with when they're trying to develop a new podcast or any type of new creative enterprise. They're like, what do I do? How do I become good? And how do I succeed? And I see you as having created a body of work that sort of engages those basic questions from multiple angles, like through the podcasting medium. I first became familiar with Jay's work through a podcast that was sponsored by Castos. It's like a podcast hosting company that we use here at the lab, and it was called 3 Clips by Castos, and it hit on all these aspects. And now he's working on Unthinkable, and I think it all involves this marketing or this management theory, this entrepreneurship type of stuff. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, what I really am fascinated by studying, if that's the mission, help others make what matters, then there's a lot of, that's the why. There's a lot of hows, right? Like, the first foray into that mission was probably 2015. I was working in a venture capital firm in Boston and New York that invests in seed stage, early stage tech companies. And that was my last in-house job. Previously, I'd worked in marketing and media roles for places like Google and HubSpot before they went public, and a tiny little startup no one's ever heard of. That was a profound learning experience for me too. And so I was in marketing and media roles, having come out of school wanting to be a sports journalist. So I'd written columns for my student paper. I became a sports editor. I interned at different publications in my home state of Connecticut, and such a learning experience to have to walk up to random strangers who are decades older than you and stick a recorder in their face and ask good questions and write a piece and meet a deadline and all these things. I just am so grateful for the journalistic experience. But I liked sports because I liked the human interest stories, the feature pieces, the columnists who would make you feel something big or think something important in a way that the daily slog didn't seem to allow for, whether you're a student or you're a professional. And so when I got into business, I was a little sort of begrudging about it. I didn't love the idea of working in marketing. I worked in sales and account management at Google, consulting their advertisers who would run ads through Google's products. And it was like just not the job for me. I was supposed to love it. I was that A-type student who got the grades, joined the club, become the leader of the club, join the sports, become the captain of the team. I was sold this career path that was in this nice, neat box labeled career that did not match who I am, or maybe even the era that I live in. And I was miserable. I was like, wait, I'm at Google. I should love this. Why am I so unhappy? Well, it's because I wasn't living the career or building the career that's uniquely suited for me and my skills. And so what I've found is, since moving through all these in-house jobs and discovering kind of who I am and what I want, I value not certainty, but I value control, which I think those are sort of inversely proportional. The more certainty you have, the less control, because you're working in a giant organization that gives you everything. The more control you have, you probably just started a business on your own. If you want total control, you obviously have less certainty, and you trade these things off against each other. I value control more than certainty. And so being an in-house individual just wasn't for me. I like to say I'm bad at bosses. I just think I like having control over what I'm building. And so my first foray into doing that kind of work was in 2016, leaving that venture capital firm to run my podcast Unthinkable, and basically have a paid public speaking business on the side. That was my engine that drove revenue to grow my show. And a funny thing happened along the way, which was people had heard Unthinkable, or the venture capital firm I worked for, I'd also done a show for them. They heard these two shows. They sounded different, both occupying a saturated space. Lots of VCs have shows even back then. And I was talking about creativity in business. That's also a saturated niche with my show, where you might say creativity in marketing even. And people were like, but this is different. There's something about these shows that feels different than the average brand making a show to promote themselves, or just to talk to a laundry list of experts with no real differentiation to the approach. Could you make a show for us, Jay? And I'd never thought of doing that, but the opportunities came inbound because I was always this publish happy person with side blogs all the time about sports and business, side blogs about, anything I wanted to write about. And that engine, that muscle to create on the side led me to create podcasts, maybe more confidently. Maybe I'm like a little self-delusional, but I think it's useful in some ways. So now I get all these opportunities of brands coming to me wanting to make a show for them. And now that's a big core of what I do, which is I make shows for brands as a big driver of revenue, in addition to my own projects, which are these teaching vehicles to help inspire greater creativity in the workplace.
So like, I want to talk about being special in a second, but I just want to touch on this backstory, because I think a lot of students will sympathize with this. So when you were in college, you sort of wanted to be expressive in your work or do a creative type of work. But like a lot of young people, you were like, well, I guess I have to grow up and get like the good job.
Yeah.
And eventually, though, you found that you figured out a way to go back to that passion of being an expressive or a creative, and you sort of merged it with your business knowledge and found a new way to pursue that passion in a more viable space type of thing. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. I love the Marvel movies, and people who like Marvel will know the character Winter Soldier. And I like to say I'm like Winter Soldier. So this is a character who was just a guy at one point. He's a friend of Captain America's. And he gets abducted by the bad guys, and they give him super soldier serum. So now he's super powered. They give him a metal arm. All these things he didn't ask for or seek out, he was given. And now that he's awake again, he's a superhero for the good side. And I kind of feel like that's my story. It's like, the people I worked with weren't evil or anything in marketing and sales, but I learned the language of business. I learned the operations of how do you grow an audience for a brand? How do you develop a business that actually sells products and services, not ad space, which is a crumbling, very weak business model today? How do you speak the language of people who might hire you, who want something from your creativity? And you can show them how not diluting the creative, not doing it to the lowest common denominator is actually really good for business. So I've kind of become this translator for folks looking to do that on their own. And I'm able to do that in my business, speaking the language I feel is now fluent, which is marketing and sales and brand building and business, and marrying that to the behavior that I'm sort of most comfortable in, which is creating maybe a higher caliber story or narrative or experience. Because a lot of people in business, their tendency is, what's the cheapest possible route to do this? Let's water it down. What's everyone else doing? Let's copy them. The cliche for years and years was like, we want design like Apple, right? We want virality like Facebook. Like, people aren't necessarily seeing clearly when they approach creative projects. So in the podcast space specifically, what this leads to, especially business brands selling to other businesses, they sell software to other businesses, for example, is everyone looks the same. You could white label every podcast, remove the name that it actually has, and replace it with the same name across the board, and it would still make sense. Talking topics with experts. I'm going to
Yeah.
interview, I sell tools for salespeople. I'm going to interview sales experts. I sell tools for marketers. I'm going to interview marketing experts, and on down the line. And it's just, I just get personally frustrated with the lack of care for craft, with the lack, with the gaze that most marketers and business people have being lowered to that lowest common denominator creatively, because sometimes they think that works. Oftentimes they just haven't seen what they can do creatively, even with a restricted budget, even when they're not like a media company. So that to me has been an unexpected and definitely like not something I sought out superpower, which is having worked in marketing and in sales and around a lot of founders in VC, having seen the machinations of a good business or many good businesses, I now know how to thrive professionally through creativity and help others do the same.
Yeah. And it's inspiring too, because I think a lot of people think that learning creative skills is a waste if you don't become an actor or a writer. But what your story suggests is those skills are going to be useful, even if they are not in the title of your first job. You'll use them,
right,
at some point.
To me, all creativity gets a bad rap, or it's misconstrued, I think is more accurate. It's misconstrued as you got to go big. Creativity means big. I disagree. I think it's just the sum total of lots of little choices that anybody can make en route to finalizing a project. People think creativity means, a big spike in the numbers, tons of audience, tons of sales, tons of acclaim, whatever. I think actually creativity is how you approach the work all the time, right? If you have 5 hours and $500, it's not about getting more time and budget. It's about how you use your 5 hours and $500. It's how you see the world and execute accordingly. So there's all these myths. It's the muse. It's innate, it's in who I am. Ultimately, when you boil it down, it's a practice. You make a thing, then you do it again. You do it again, you do it, and you keep improving all the while. And so on the side, I've always had a writing practice. Now I have a writing and a podcasting practice. And all of that practice, all the junk, quite frankly, that I've created over the years gets me to the point where someone like you who has taste and can discern people from each other says, can you come and talk to us? Like the only reason I'm here is because I'm sitting atop a body of work, most of which is bad. That's it. And that's any creator. If an alien species visited our world and were to look at folks who create media for professionally and actually analyze somehow with their alien technology, every single thing that person or group created, the only conclusion they could make is you're all really bad at this.
Yeah.
Like you have these outlier successes, but the problem is all we see are the outlier successes. All you see are the shows that I continue because they're working. You don't see all the pilots that fail. You don't see all the drafts I delete. You don't see, the versions of the draft before the thing becomes good. This is just the practice, and it's about constant improvement. That's true of an overall career. It's true of the creative craft. It's also really difficult for businesses to get on board with because they think every attempt has to work, right? And so the trick is to show them what they want. Their goals are better served with what you can bring as a creative. It is not, you're doing it wrong, business world, do it my way. And so that's kind of that translative work that I do, but it's built on top of a lot of bad work that I've done.
Well, it's also, I feel like if you can reward a listener once, even over several episodes, the listener will appreciate it because good insights are hard to come by. And like all you have to do is give somebody a reward once in a while, and you'll take many kicks at the net. You'll miss usually, but if you can land a few goals, then they like you. But the other thing that came up in your response was, how people think about being good, and I think a lot of people key in on things like equipment or marketing or paying for promotion, only because that aspect of the business is obvious and doable. And a lot of people, when they start off, like they want to be special, they want to be good, but what does that even mean? Like they don't, you don't even know where to start. It's simple to say this microphone is great and I've tested it and it works. But what does somebody do when they first approach the craft and the business of being a podcaster? And they're like, well, I want to be good, but I don't know what that is even.
Yeah.
What is it like in your experience? Like what makes a podcast special or good?
Sure. So I grew up playing basketball. I mentioned sports before. I grew up playing it in high school and played a ton just for fun and extracurriculars in college. And that was my sport. There's this very familiar phenomenon if you play basketball, especially pick up basketball like at the park or at a local gym. This familiar thing you'll notice as a player. You'll walk into, people are shooting around, you haven't picked teams yet, and you'll see this person. Like I always saw this one guy down the end of the court, and he just looked like an awesome player. He had the compression sleeve on his arm and, unbelievable gear. He looked great with all the things he'd bought for the, whatever shirt or shorts he was wearing, the brand new LeBron James shoes or whatever popular shoe it was at the moment in time. The guy would look the part of an incredible player. And then a funny thing would happen when the ball would go up. That person could not play.
Yeah.
That to me describes a lot of people creating online today. They want to look the part of a creator, whether that's in-house as a marketer or self-expression with a fun project that maybe you hope leads to an audience or a business someday. A lot of people want to look the part. And so I'll talk to lots of folks or maybe appear on their shows. And it's like, wow, your studio setup is unbelievable. Like you've clearly spent a ton of time and money in doing that. I know a software company that is a giant company that spent hundreds of thousands of dollars building an in-house studio for themselves before they'd launch a single episode. So here's the thing. When you go play basketball, the gear and all that stuff, that's not what basketball is. Playing basketball is what basketball is. Everything else is incremental, right? Playing the sport is what basketball is. Same with podcasting, being on a microphone, connecting with your audience, having a really important premise developed well, the idea driving your entire show, having a very gripping episode format that gets people to the end, the way you format and structure your episode, even if it's an interview, the plan you take to that interview, and then you, the talent, the ability to connect with your personality and bring forth that personality, not as you would over coffee or on a stage, but through this device here. That is playing. That is the game. That's developing a great podcast. As for the way you look, that's incremental. That can come later. Like you would listen to a gripping, incredible storyteller with a worse microphone than someone with unbelievable audio and a crisp, clear video of themselves who fumbles, who can't grip you, who can't tell a story. So most people want to be that player with all the gear. I am very much in favor, and this fits people's budgets better, by the way, of using what's between your ears, not what's in your wallet, to stand out today creatively.
Mm-hmm. But what happens, like, for example, when an aspiring podcaster says, okay, I'm sold. I want to learn the how-to, and I'm going to do it on my phone. But what do I do concretely then? If I'm not buying equipment, then how do I get started? What do I need to do to be special, to not just be another one of these also rans?
Awesome. Let's talk about show development, because that's what you're talking about. How do you develop a show? You hear this like mythology. You might hear an interview with somebody who's a showrunner in LA, or they've, Hollywood scripts and all this stuff. And it's like, it is this like black box. And very simply, a show is the combination of three distinct things. It's the premise, the format, and the talent. And I mentioned those quickly before. The premise is the concept driving the entire show. It's not just the topics you explore, because that's not differentiated. If you're talking about marketing today, you're not going to own the idea of marketing. You're also not going to own the idea of B2B content marketing for small businesses in Toronto, no matter how niche that sounds. Like the topics, what you explore is not differentiated, but how you explore it might be. And when you combine what and how, you give the audience a reason why they'd care. So with a premise, what you're looking for, and this is something that is very useful for someone like me who, I'm Sicilian, so I'm very animated and very passionate. And when you're born Sicilian, you automatically, or you're born with like a chip on your shoulder. So useful for me, but I think practiced for others and useful for them too. Start with frustration. So who do you want to serve? What is broken about what they're doing? With Unthinkable, I'm exploring this concept of creative resonance. Everyone is exploring reach, more audience, more followers, top line numbers, more growth. Well, what actually does the work of getting you results, what actually sparks action in others, whether the result is a sale or a subscriber or, evangelizing a cause in the world and improving the world, we need action from other people. The resonance does that, not the reach. Like being visible is not what marketing actually is. It's ensuring they care. And so we assume if more people knew about us, they love us. Let's focus on the love us part, really. And the reach tends to take care of itself, because if you have passionate fans, they will go tell others for you for free. So there's my business case translation coming out, right? Essentially what I just did was make a smart sounding case, I hope, for me saying to a marketer, hey, that show you're making? You should make it good, but I can't say that. I have to say it in the terms I just said. So
Yeah.
anyways, back to this idea of the premise. The premise provides motivation to subscribe. It's what you're saying and how. It has the hook. So a great example of a premise comes from a software company called Lessonly. Lessonly sells tools for you, if you're running a sales team, to train your salespeople, right? Like they can practice, they can look at scripts, they can learn the product. If you're a new salesperson at a new company, you might be using Lessonly's tools purchased by your boss to train you. Well, everyone around Lessonly, I think they have 80 competitors in North America alone. They all look the same. They all sound the same in their marketing. They're talking about sales excellence, tips and tricks to be great at sales. Along comes Lessonly and says, you know what? Our best customers understand that sales is not about the gift of gab. Sales is not about interrupting other people and pushing your agenda. Sales is not about a script that you read and it's magical and somehow works for every person. Sales is a practice. So they see sales the way I see creativity. Sales is a practice. So they launched a show that had a premise that I love called Practice First. Practice First, exploring how world-class practicers execute their practice so we can execute ours better as salespeople and do better work. So maybe they talk to a sales executive once in a while, but they also talk to Olympians and sommeliers and all these people that the normal sales business would not feature in their marketing or on their show because they have a very specific premise. So when you encounter a show, or more specifically the premise like Practice First, one of two things happen. You either go, oh my God, you're speaking to my soul. That's so for me. Thank you. Or you're going, I disagree. Nope. I feel pride in the gift of gab. This was given to me at birth. My entire story as an individual is that it is innate in me to be a great salesperson. This is not a practice. Get out of here with that. Right. So you stand for something and you want to change something for the better for people. They want more salespeople to practice better, to do better work. So that's an example of a premise. That's where you start. What's broken among the community you want to serve? Go ahead.
Can I interject just a point on something you just said?
Yeah, sure. You got me on my soapbox. I'm all fired up.
No. I'm actually loving this stuff. But I think a lot of young people, when they start off, they're thinking about developing premises or show ideas that will appeal to everybody. And what I gather from you're saying, no, you don't have to like be the mainstream thing that everybody loves.
No,
you just got to find a pocket where you can get 10,000 people or 15,000 people who are into your specific space. And you got something that's viable. Am I interpreting you correctly? Well,
let's talk about why the number of listeners matters, right? Yeah. I think you're on the right path there, but it's like, okay, so are you trying to monetize with advertising? Right. Are you trying to throw a bunch of ads from a mattress company or a soda company onto your show? Well, then, yeah, you're going to try and play to the masses. It's incredibly difficult. And I would say not as rewarding. It's very difficult to stand out trying to play to the masses because everyone else is also playing that game. And the world doesn't need yet another chat cast featuring smart, funny people yucking it up. Like, guess who's better at that? Everybody who's at the top of the charts, right? The world, however, might need you to do the show that only you can create. What is your unique point of view, your perspective? And when we bring forth our best, our full selves, our perspectives on something, we will naturally appeal deeply to a smaller group of people. That's how all these brands that we admire today, they're not building P&G and Coca-Cola and PepsiCo. They're very, very passionate followers supporting these companies. And the lifetime value of every one of those followers is huge because they're so passionate about the brand that they will refer others to that brand. And quite frankly, the brand can unlock more revenue from those individuals because they can sell anything. I mean, they could sell more things that seem like the existing product, or they could do something that seems bizarre, sell tickets to an event or some tangential product that has nothing to do with, the sneakers they sell or the software for productivity that they usually offer, because you're so irrationally biased towards that brand. So the punchline to all this is we're not trying to make the biggest show. We're not trying to be the best at this. What the goal actually is to make their favorite show. And favorite doesn't mean great in any academic or objective sense. Favorite is someone's personal preferred pick for a specific purpose. They make emotional decisions. Everyone does. We're human beings. And they pick you. And if someone came to them and said, why are you listening to that show about X? Because all these other shows about X exist. Or famous person 123 just launched a show about X too. Why don't you listen to their show? They go, I don't care because that one's my favorite. My favorite sports team, the New York Knicks, historically, not awesome. Not awesome. Sometimes the worst. Think about that. The worst in the cohort is my favorite. I give them my time and my attention and my dollars. So it's not about being objectively the best or higher ranked or larger. It's about having this irrational bias, this relationship that is almost protected against any competitor. And that only forms when you can somehow reach out and tap the emotional reason they'd care about whatever it is you're talking about.
Oscar, you wanted to make a comment? I saw in chat. One of our interns, Oscar Rosario. Oscar, go ahead. What's your comment?
I was just going to say in this regard, you're talking about how you should probably invest in doing something that's unique as opposed to just being the atypical, popular smart guys yucking it up. That has a lot of word in like the YouTube space, where you see a lot of content creators that are popular because of their specific niche. Like, for instance, somebody could get popular making speed runs of a single game. I know a popular YouTuber that has their entire career based off playing Mario Kart Wii and nothing but. So in some ways, it's a valuable experience to just focus solely on your specific interests.
100%. And, there's a lot of examples we can point to that says, well, Jay, you're wrong because they don't have a premise. Like a common one in the business world is NPR has a show, How I Built This, with Guy Raz. People go, well, all he does is he takes famous entrepreneurs and creative people and tells the story of their success. And forget for a moment they do it exceptionally well with a laundry list of professional audio producers and storytellers, which, oh, by the way, that's what I tell a lot of clients. I'm like, okay, you want to make a show like that? Do me a favor, skip to the end of the next episode, listen to the credits. Okay, just are we staffing 20 people on the show? So let's pump the brakes. Joe Rogan, Bill Simmons, Dax Shepard, whatever big podcaster you want to name that's sort of like a big personality-led show. You can argue, well, they don't have a hook. They don't have some kind of unique angle or conceit. It's a general show about sports and pop culture. Bill Simmons, business success, Guy Raz. The hook is that famous person has a show. So if you're already famous, like I'm pretty sure Taylor Swift could read the dictionary on YouTube and get 1 million subscribers.
Right.
So most of us are better off accepting that as mere mortals who don't have an incredible amount of fame. Most people want us to do something that serves them, not ourselves. Because most people aren't excited about sort of the voyeurism of watching a celebrity do something. They're much more excited about saying, well, something's going to be different when I finish this experience. What? Working in the business category as I do, people want their careers to be better, their careers to be more fulfilling, their businesses to grow, etc. There's very specific permutations of that, all the tiny little versions of that in your specific category of business. People are arriving thinking, what's different when I'm done? And most people don't answer that. Most people have a very flat approach. There's not much of a thrust or story or emotional through line to their show. They don't pick a specific topical niche, to Oscar's point. They also aren't willing to use any kind of point of view or even gamification. There's a popular show on YouTube called Hot Ones. There's 1 million celebrity interview series on YouTube. Only Hot Ones ask the celebrities they interview to eat progressively spicier wings as they ask better and better questions. I saw a marketing company do Hot Ones for marketing executives, where they interviewed all these marketing experts and asked them to eat progressively spicier wings. Why did that one fall flat? And why does Hot Ones make sense? Well, because Hot Ones is on a channel about the intersection of food and pop culture. Totally makes sense that they'd marry the two in their premise. This software company sells tools to be better on social media. If you're a brand, where do the Hot Ones come in? So they missed an opportunity to say something that matters to their audience. That is the role of a premise. It's not just narrowly picking a niche or a topic. It's the first opportunity to say something that matters to your audience. Unthinkable. We explore resonance, not reach. We challenge the conventional wisdom of more, growth. That is for a few people who love it dearly and not for everyone else. Practice first from Lessonly. That is a certain mentality you need when you arrive. So the idea that it's about topics and getting narrower is a good start, but you also want to add in some kind of point of view or hook that, by the way, maps to what you're trying to say as a business or as an individual. That's your first attempt. I want to say something that matters. That's your premise. And the rest gets a lot easier to produce as a result.
So, the idea of a hot ones for marketing executives, I like that the payoff also doesn't make sense. For celebrities, you want to throw them off their game to get a candid moment. But when you're bringing in a marketing expert, you're bringing them in for technical knowledge. And like your takes are probably worse when you're throwing off your game. If you bring in a marketer, you probably want the person to be dedicating their full mental faculties
Right,
to the,
right.
you know,
Well, that's where the idea of like having a personal practice matters as a creative. Like if I hadn't made a lot of shows and studied a lot of shows myself, I wouldn't be able to say, I'd be able to say to the customer, even without making my own shows, we're going to develop a premise, a format, and talent. And hopefully that in and of itself, that heuristic is useful to a client I'm working with. But because I've also made a lot of shows and watched and studied a lot, I can say something a little bit more in the weeds and a little more kind of tailored to that exact scenario. What I would say is exactly right. So the reason they're doing the hot ones thing, as I just explained, is it makes sense for their brand. But forget the strategic part. What if you just love the gimmick and you're a marketing tools company? Well, yeah. Are you going to have the best performers in your space who can kind of ad lib and riff and react in funny ways? Because what you might just get are a bunch of horrified people that are not horrified in very entertaining ways, the way an actor or a comedian or professional athlete who's been in the media a lot might be on hot ones. So there's these like tiny little nuances that are really not considered by a lot of brands that are making shows, all the way up to the big ideas of like, this is a strategy, here are the 3 parts we're developing. And so all of it connects, but there's just a lack of, I'd say, care for craft, or more so knowledge. It's just so new. Like there are fewer podcasts than blogs and newsletters and YouTube channels and videos overall. And everyone's going, oh, we're late to podcasting. No, you're profoundly early. And also, if there are problems to still be solved for your audience, there's a need for yet another podcast. No one bats an eye on writing more articles online or launching that next newsletter. And people are balking at the fact that there's a lot of podcasts. There's a lot of bad podcasts, but yours might not exist and it still needs to.
So let's talk about format now. So we spoke about premise, which is sort of one of the 3 pillars that you talk about creating a great podcast. And I'm understanding that to be sort of the content ideas, like what are you going to be talking about? Basically what you're going to be talking about, the focus.
Yeah, it's the thesis you're interrogating throughout the show, or the lens or point of view, or the premise is the angle that you're taking throughout the show. It's the purpose of the show.
So let's talk. And then you're saying that you want to negotiate a premise and a format. What's format and what do you do with that?
Format is what happens once they hit play, because in podcasting, you only have one job, which is make sure they don't hit stop. In other words, the golden rule of what we do as storytellers is get them to the end. Podcasting fits a very specific need in the overall sort of media consumption or portfolio of media you might create. It's not great for net new reach. Podcasts don't rank on search to be found through Google very easily. Podcasts don't get shared on social. It's pretty clunky to do that. The stuff that ranks on search or gets shared on social is the content created around the show, the landing page on your website, the social media graphics and clips and quotes, that kind of stuff. That does the growth. What the show itself does is it cements the relationship. It's like a relationship accelerant, because you want people to have that intimacy with you, that feeling like, oh, you're for me, my favorite show, and I'm going to go refer this to 5 friends. So it's great for resonance. It's really bad for reach. It's hard to grow a big show without an injection of audience coming from somewhere else, as if joining a network, for example. So as you start to develop the show, the entire goal is to keep them there. And that is the work done by the format. The format is about structuring the experience in such a way that they get to the end. There are 2 types of formats. They might call this a rundown in production parlance. One is visible. The other option is invisible. So a visible rundown, people probably know these. If you watch a sports, talking head show on TV, they might show it visibly along the side. Here are the topics. Here's the timer.
They're like, now it's time for the mailbag.
Right.
Is that what you mean? Okay.
Mailbag.
Yeah.
Yep. So you can make a visible rundown. Other shows like The Ringer's Binge Mode does this well, where they'll introduce segments. They'll actually tell you next up is this, or they'll play a little musical sting. You, the audience, know there is a format. There is a structure. There's a rundown. That's a visible rundown. The invisible side of it is I'm a storyteller. I'm an interviewer. To you, it feels like one coherent, awesome experience, but you never want to leave that experience. Why? Because I have a plan. I understand how to format it. And so once you understand that even the things that don't have overt segmentation have a plan under it, the world is your oyster. Like I sat down with my favorite travel show, my favorite show, period. Anthony Bourdain's Parts Unknown from CNN, the late great Anthony Bourdain. He's my storytelling hero. And I, in 2016, was trying to make a storytelling podcast, and I needed a format. And there's storytelling heuristics out there like Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, or Dan Harmon, who created Rick and Morty and other shows. He has Community. He has the story Circle, which is a modification of Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. So there's formats that exist for how to tell a great story and structure it. But I wanted to know what my hero was doing. So I took a notebook and I sat down and I watched his episode in Mexico. And I went, minute this to minute this. This is what was achieved for me, the audience. This is what they did to achieve it, right? This is the next block. This is the next block. So I made up a term for this. I call it an extraction. Extract the underlying structure of your favorite storytellers. And even if they don't know the plan is there, because it's so natural to them, you're better off starting with those guardrails and goalposts, and then inserting your own point of view and style and voice and content into those blocks. So you're not trying to be Anthony Bourdain, you're trying to structure your work as he did. And when you realize that all these stories exist that are so gripping, that get you to the end, and you can ask a simple question, why? Why did they grip me? Now it's like a veil is removed from your eyes, and where you see the code of the matrix, like everyone else gets the whole, you see that they had an underlying plan. And if you listen closely to great interviewers, sometimes they'll hint at this. And I love when this happens. I'll listen to a journalist like Kara Swisher of the New York Times interview somebody who's been interviewed everywhere. She has a plan to make hers unique and to also structure in a way that is a good flow for the listener. So she might say, someone might answer a question and then go on a tangent. And she goes, we're going to get to that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, she's got a plan, right?
Yeah.
So you get the whole, and it feels like one cohesive flow, one cohesive whole, but they had an underlying plan. And even if they couldn't tell you what it is, we are better off stealing it, borrowing it, modifying it for our own purposes. So that's the power of an episode format. You get them to the end.
Okay, that's fantastic. So if I'm understanding this, it's almost like the premise is the actual content that will be presented. And format is like it's the presentation template or the storytelling template. Because I know even as a podcast host, like you will develop a structure, a generic structure, because you can't come up with, reinvent the wheel every time.
And by the way, it's easier to reinvent things or invent things. So let me rephrase. It's easier to reinvent than invent.
Yeah.
Right. It's start with something and then rip it apart, change it, etc. And, you do that 5 or 6 episodes or 500 episodes later, it's completely an original. Right.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm going to go and wander and gaze at my navel and like out pops a beautiful new idea. It's far better building off of the things that you love, that you're like, I wish this existed. Like, I wish Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown existed about business or about creativity in business. Right. That was kind of my first attempt. Fast forward 170 something episodes now with Unthinkable, and you might catch some of the same vibes, but it's definitely its own thing. It's like the structure has changed over the years.
I remember one of the best pieces of writing advice that I ever got was from one of my professors. His name is Paul Starr. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner. And I was like, well, how do I become a good writer? And he said, it's very simple. Imitate writers who you like. And the profound thing about that advice is that it forces you to look at what the people who you like are doing, like how they do it. Because sometimes we just passively consume it and we jump in it without really focusing on method.
Right. I do feel like, there's a great book by author Austin Kleon called Steal Like an Artist. I do feel like we over invest, or again, it's the myth of creativity. Creativity means big and all this stuff. We believe that it's like popped out of nowhere is this beautiful new thing. Well, that new thing is an amalgam of a lot of experiences and influences that person has. You can't help but be influenced by things you love. And what are we doing as creative people if not translating our experience of the world or a specific topic therein through our own experience of life out into the world? And actually, Bourdain has a wonderful quote about that. To think that you can publish the book that they'd pick up or that they'd stay past the commercial break and come back to watch, that is not reasonable thinking. There's something a bit monstrous, he says, about a creative person saying, I can create something they appreciate, stick with, despite all the other stuff out there. Like, we need what author A.J. Jacobs calls useful self-delusion.
Yeah.
Useful self-delusion. I'm going to convince myself that, yes, I can create something like my heroes. And I think I am privileged wrapped in privilege. I was born, when I was born, to a wonderful family. I am white, straight, male, northeast of the United States. The door was ajar when I was born, and I had loving parents saying, that's the door. Here's how to push, go push. Like, some people are born and there's a padlock on the door. Some people are born and there's 6 padlocks and barbed wire and a tank of sharks between them. And right, I am so beyond privileged. And I just want to use that as a caveat. But the hard work that we do as creators is honestly in our own minds, is to convince ourselves, I should proceed. I have this useful self-delusion that, yes, I should make this thing, even though everybody would probably advise me against it, because who needs another podcast or book, or what do you uniquely have to say? And I think that's built, that's not found. It's just about doing it a lot and finding it. But even that starting point, even if you're like, I know this is going to be bad, just getting over that barrier takes a lot of, I think, sort of mental jujitsu. You got to play on yourself to just make stuff.
Yeah. When young people come to me with, reservations about that, I tell them, it's a lot like dating. Yeah, there comes a point when you're a teenager where you're like, well, maybe somebody would like to go on a date with me. And you have to believe that before you can ever go out on a date. And I find with young people, the biggest fear there, even newcomers, one of the biggest fears they have is negative feedback. And I think people tend to magnify the negative that they see instead of realizing there are people that are like them.
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, as tribal species that are ultimately basically field-dwelling monkeys trying to live in a society that's outgrown our species. Like, really, our hardware here has not really grown as much as our world. Any little bit of being ostracized or being critiqued is you getting pushed to the edge of the tribe and getting picked off by a saber-toothed tiger. Yeah. Like, any unknown, any fear, any rustle in the bushes. Like, it's hard to convince your lizard brain that you're not going to get picked off by a tiger at night. So we have these impulses that are really hard to ignore based in biology, but societally and intellectually and philosophically, we don't know what to do with negative feedback. I get this all the time where it's like, they don't get it. Screw them, or, oh no, like, I feel hurt. Like, the best way to ruin my day is critique me on Twitter. I'm on Twitter all the time. I should be able to handle one critique. I still can't. And I'm doing public work. I think that the way to use negative feedback is to first ask a question, which is, okay, is this work ultimately for that type of person or not? So for example, I serve B2B, business to business creators and marketers. In other words, the work published by my audience speaks about career and business things, just as I do. So if I see somebody who is, teaching gardening, critiquing my latest podcast episode, I might say, I wish they liked it, but I'm actually not focused on that audience. I'm not focused on serving them. My work is not for you. And you should be able to say, my work is not for these types of people. High five, handshake, hugs. I'm not for you. But the second tier down is, I actually am trying to serve that person. And this is a wonderful bit of data, because they didn't like something, and maybe they didn't offer it. Maybe they were like, this sucked, end of tweet. Yeah. And that's hard to parse, but you can still say, well, am I getting that? Maybe they're having a bad day, but if I get that a couple times, like 2 data points makes a trend. Yeah. What can I do with this information and this data? I can say, in my head, this made total sense that they would love it, but they didn't. I need to work on how I articulate my ideas to meet people where they're at and their understanding of what I'm saying, then march them every step of the way to where I want to be. Right. So if I get on a stage and give a speech, and I've worked on this idea of why you should make their favorite thing, forget about being the best, be their favorite. I can't just say that when I start the speech. I have to think, well, who's in the room? It's a group of marketers. What do they want in their jobs? They want to grow their audience. They want to drive leads or sales for their business. They're marketers. So I need to start by saying that. So now I'm shoulder to shoulder with them, and I'm saying, that goal you want? Okay, hear me out. I think I have a great way to get it. And now they're open to learning. But if I had just walked on stage and say, forget being bigger, growing your brand bigger, who cares? Be their favorite. They're not really ready to hear that. So they could critique me. And rather than say they don't get it in that critique, I could say, what is this critique trying to tell me? It might be trying to tell me that I'm not positioning myself correctly or articulating my ideas correctly. And so I think there's some selfishness in saying negative feedback equals bad. I think it does take a lot of sort of swallowing your pride, but we can use that as data to improve, again, if it comes from the people that we've chosen to serve.
All right, now let's close this tripartite, the third leg of the stool, and talk about talent.
Yes.
So you have a premise, what to talk about, you have a format, your storytelling or engagement sort of method, your plan for keep bringing in and keeping the audience. What's talent, the third part?
If the premise provides motivation to subscribe, like I'm aligned with that premise, I love it, I'm in. And the format provides motivation to stay. It's like get them to the end. Everything is ordered correctly such that it feels gripping all the way through. Then the talent, you provide motivation to act. You are where the relationship forms. You'll see this a lot from brands. They'll hire a celebrity to host their branded podcast. They own the podcast. They're not sponsoring it. They're building it. They own the content. They're distributing it on their social media, through their newsletter, et cetera. But they've hired a celebrity. The problem with that is, while the celebrity is going to get a lot of play, they're going to get a lot of attention. Now it's them that the person listening trusts. It's the relationships formed with the celebrity, not say an executive or just an individual who works at the company, as a proxy for why you should like and trust that brand. So the brand is now paying production costs for sponsorship benefits. They're better off going to a celebrity saying, you have a great show, can we sponsor it? Because it's the same benefits. So you, the host, the voice, are the source of that intimate connection, which is a human voice. You are the source of all kinds of personality quirks. And my refrain to people who are holding back is let your quirks out from where they're hiding. Be fully you on the microphone and learn how to harness that over time. Don't be someone else. You might start out by doing an imitation of someone else. I get it. But the more you practice it, the more you're listening back. I do this all the time. I listen twice to my shows after they're published. Once is a little celebratory mental dance that I'm doing. It's, hundreds of episodes later, it's still so cool for me to have my show appear in the feeds alongside all my other favorite shows. So I'll go and listen to it just to enjoy it because I wanted this story to exist. And there it is. But the second is like a producer and a news anchor reviewing footage of that night's show, or an athlete reviewing game tape with a coach. Now I'm looking for ways to improve. Now I'm looking for, where did I feel bored of my own work? Where did I feel most excited? Ooh, that bad dad joke, I thought I delivered well. Actually, I delivered it poorly, and it was a bad dad joke, so extra poorly.
Yeah.
Right? Like now you're trying to get better. And so as talent, you have an opportunity to not be a podcast host, but to be you somehow translated through this device right here, which again is practiced. And I think you can kind of stack the evolution of somebody's kind of talent or hosting process on something I call the style spectrum, where at the bottom of the spectrum, you blend in. You're just like everyone else, and you're not really serving your audience that well. And at the top of the spectrum, you are fully present. You're not forgettable. You are yourself. And the four pieces of that spectrum at the bottom is reported facts. So you have some hosts, it's like you're more of an announcer, really. I don't know who you are. I don't have a relationship with you. It's like the voice from God intros you might hear from some shows, right? Before you meet the actual host. That person is basically who you're acting like. If all you do is curate a bunch of facts and present them. It's important. You want to be factually correct when you tell stories or opine or whatever, but that is the most commodified thing today, is the what. What happened? A step up from that is you can analyze those facts. You can be that pundit or that person that connects and contextualizes facts. It's like last week in the marketing community, MailChimp did this. Okay, that's not very useful. You're not separating. You're the announcer voice. I don't need a relationship with you to understand that fact. And what we're seeing from MailChimp matches what Salesforce and Google did last year, which is similar to what we might see from all these smaller brands in the same space. So if you're following this trend, expect to see more of X, Y, or Z. Okay, now you're connecting facts. You're now not just a reporter, you're an analyst.
Yeah.
Right? That's super useful. You're now providing a deeper service for someone. The layer up from that is you opine, right? So if this is what happened and this is what it could mean, now you're saying this is what should happen or what it should mean. You're giving an opinion. I think MailChimp is doomed. They just got bought by a bigger tech company and this cool, playful brand. It's going to be torn down by the corporate overlords that they just sold their business to. And this change to their product is just further proof of that. Now I'm ranting. You don't have to give an opinion like that. You don't have to be these like jokesters on these like business shows that you see or wherever. You don't have to be the talking heads from ESPN shouting about the NFL, but you want to start giving your opinion, your point of view. And all the way at the top, kind of a very specific type of inspiration exists, which is you're not just saying, here's what happened and here's the context of it, or here's what it should mean. You're now saying, I'm going to give you a little push to move forward from this show. Because remember, your premise is about helping the audience in some way. I want to help you understand something. I'm dissecting Marvel movies. I think we can appreciate Marvel in this way, and no one else is talking about it like that. And I just want to remind you that's what we do here. So remember, the next movie you see, the next episode of Hawkeye you watch, X, Y, or Z from this episode could apply. There's some inspiration there. And obviously it's a little more overt with business advice or career advice. You can inspire. In other words, you can challenge your audience and push them to somehow leave the experience improved. And that is, I think, when you're at the height of your powers.
So I think I'm understanding this. You're the talent aspect is you're saying, all right, it resides in the relationship between the performers or the hosts and the audience. And you're asking, there's a relationship in there. What are you delivering to the audience through that relationship? Is that sort of what you're getting at?
Yeah. How do you make the audience better? Do you just curate a bunch of facts that could get anywhere? You're kind of not that useful. Do you connect the facts? You're a little more useful. I could still get that with a quick Google search, though. Are you giving your opinion and point of view? A lot of people are very popular because they have good opinions or strong opinions. And a very few number of show hosts leave you feeling something after you experience their content. And again, that applies to entertainment content, that applies to fun, jokey shows, all the way through shows that feel more apt or appropriate for inspiration, like improving your career or societal change or something.
Yeah, that's funny. I remember we randomly sample listening charts to just get a sense of like stuff that we wouldn't see. And I remember there was one podcast that I came across that was like AI voiced. It was basically conveyance of facts, but what they did is it was hyper local. So it was like the COVID count in your town today is 14,000. Yeah. And I guess you would put it in your morning playlist or something like that. They do it with weather reports.
Yeah, there's two types of shows. Like if you're going to a show to get some kind of value, as anyone would, there's only two types of value. There's something called, transactional value or transformational value. Transactional value, the value of the show is having listened in the past. It's like, I just want to download this quickly to my brain. It's like what happened in the pandemic or what happened last week in my industry or whatever. So news shows are very transactional typically. And I just want the information. The experience to get it needs to be shorter and quicker because when you transact, you want to finish the transaction. You don't want to like have a good time in line at the grocery store. You want to move quicker through the grocery store line. So there's a lot of shows who are doing that. And so that having listened is the value. Then there's another type of show where it's transformational. The listening, the experience is part of the value. Transactional shows, very hard to stand out. Transactional shows can help you, but it almost doesn't matter the source. It's like a commodity. It's like, I'm going to get my white rice somewhere. I don't really care about the brand. This is a commodity. I'll get it anywhere, cheaper, faster, quicker. The transformational shows, unlike transactional, which helps you, these change you. These you're like, I feel so profoundly excited or warm or better or inspired or whatever. Like my favorite Binge Mode was my favorite show about nerd culture. It's like, I just felt like some kind of way, you know what I mean? For lack of a better term, more specific term, listening to Binge Mode versus all these other people who analyze on YouTube Marvel movies. And that applies in every category. Transformational shows much more about that emotional connection and the feeling like, oh, I'm part of something bigger than myself here. And listening to the show is why I seek it out, not the download to the brain. So you might have the shows you listen to on 2x speed. Those are transactional shows. Yeah. The shows you're like, I want more. I want to be in that show more. Those are a rare breed indeed. That's the kind I love creating because it's rare. I think you have a better, more passionate fan base as a result.
Like the listening experience is rewarding in and of itself.
Oh my gosh. And it doesn't mean fancy post-production, right? It doesn't mean music scoring and narration and in the field reporting. It can just mean some positioning. The premise matters, the format, the talent, like the use of those things. It can be very lean and stripped down and still have that effect. So it's not about how fancy it is, but it does matter how you approach this work, right? It's show development. That's why they call it. You are developing it over time to be a certain way. Just walk in intentional about what that way should be.
Well, I enjoyed that on show development. And we went super long because it was quite good. So we're gonna have to compress, I guess, the I wanted to just go through the creation process.
Sure.
That was very nice. I enjoyed that, and I will be stealing that for my I'll be reusing it in my lectures. With proper citation, of course. But like, let's talk now about the experience or the job of recording individual episodes. So you have your show concept developed. Now let's talk about conceiving of individual episodes, preparing and recording. What's your method, and what advice would you give to aspiring podcasters on the creation of the individual episodes pre-production?
Sure.
So not talking about post-production.
Sure. It's a very overlooked piece of this, which is bizarre, which is, when I'm trying to sell something into a brand, or I have sold shows proactively for brands to purchase from me, or they come to me, or if you're working in-house on a marketing team or a network, or you're just doing your own show, there's a tendency to go, I'm trying to sell you or convince you of making the show. Professionals make pilots. And pilots serve two purposes. One is it gets an easier yes out of whatever stakeholders need to say yes. Two, it's a profoundly useful creative step because you get to test it out. You get to try it on for size like that. It's really hard to get all the parts and pieces in theory in a document. You got to make something first and then do it better and better and better. And you can hold up the pilot first to be this representation of what the show could be. If you get enough rounds of reviews or pressure test it with a cohort of your audience or just VIPs or stakeholders or friends, the pilot is a really important step in this process, just as it would be in network TV or is in network TV. And so the pilot to me is the first step. And what you want to do in the pilot is two things: establish the stakes of the whole show. Why should anyone care? Where is this going? What is the premise? Tell me about it. It should feel irresistible to me. And then start to explore it in the most obvious way possible. So an easy example is Unthinkable, which is my show about creativity at work. The most common refrain you hear from professionals about creativity is quality versus quantity. Which should we publish? What's the relationship? I'm on a deadline. I got to publish weekly. I can't be too quality. Okay, if I'm going to do a show about creativity at work, I have to address the biggest gorilla in the room. It's quality versus quantity. So of course, I'm going to start there. I'm working on another show about these emergent technologies you might hear described as Web3, blockchain, crypto, DAOs, et cetera. I'm working on a client show right now about that. Well, the first episode is a pilot. The pilot is talking to the client about their perspective and then going to one of the most obvious large scale changes we're seeing as a result of these technologies in a very popular niche a lot of people will understand. So the pilot happens first. But then as you plan out episodes, you want two types of episodes. You want the ones that are like the obvious, I don't want to say run of the mill, they're important, but sort of down the fairway, typical episodes. It's like we're going to talk to a variety and diversity, and that's incredibly important in all senses of the word diversity, of subjects or themes or topics. There's only two ways to do this. Either you pick a theme and go find a story or a guest that helps you explore that theme, or you start with the subject or guest name and you you tease out a purpose as to why you're talking to them. Because it's not just about their name, right? There's some kind of lesson that you want to explore. So the theme can lead and you retrofit a guest or story, or the guest or story can lead. And then you got to figure out what is the theme or angle of this episode, right? That's how you do these typical episodes. But then you want a second type, which are all your reinventions. What are your special episodes, your mini series, which is like going deeper into one specific thing, or a story you found that you want to explore through 5 episodes. Radiolab is one of the best in the business at doing this. They explore science and societal topics and really cool things. Well, they found a story at Guantanamo Bay that required them to do a whole mini series because of all the reporting that had to go into it. Couldn't be 1 hour-long episode. So you have mini series, you have playing with the format can be one way to do this. Let's do some behind the scenes episodes with me and the producer. Instead of talking about, the story of how they did it, we're going to interview an analyst and view the story from the side or something like that. There's all these ways to play with the format. And I call that the well. It's like, it's going to be hard to continue the consistency of the main type of episode. So dip into the well if and when you need it to make things easier on you and to remix the experience and sort of refresh it for the audience. And so plan those out. Don't go crazy because the pilot's going to determine a lot of that, but have, 15 to 20 ideas on a document somewhere. If you can't come up with those reasonably easily, your show doesn't have legs, right? So you got to go back to the drawing board.
I'm inferring from what you're saying, the one way to package the advice as I'm understanding it is that you shouldn't do a show that you're not actually interested in the topic. And then if you find something where your interests are genuine, then it's just a matter of just discussing the topics that you want to discuss or meeting the people that you want to meet. Is that?
There's a nuance here. I think you might even see it as a student. I see it all the time as a professional, where there's a premium placed on being influential and being an expert. And we don't need another expert. The world does not need another person who knows the answers, because the answers will change. We don't need another how-to tips and tricks, regurgitator of existing information. What we need more of in this world, and what you can use to be more creative, to stand out, to do a show you enjoy, to drive yourself forward in the harder moments. We need investigators. We need explorers, people who say, I have more questions than answers. Come with me as we explore. There's a show right now on Disney Plus called Welcome to Earth, hosted by Will Smith. That's what he's doing. He's exploring. It's Will Smith. He could create a show. It's just like, here's all the stuff I know as Will Smith. He leaves that to when he's interviewed. So don't get on a pedestal and say, I'm up here, I know something, I found something, follow my path. This like guruism, this worship of people with big audience today is disgusting, and we don't need more of it. And it also is fleeting. If you want to have a lasting impact on the world, or you want to express yourself in a way that feels unique to you, what questions do you have? Ask questions Google can't simply answer, and then go on a journey to investigate. And when you're creating a serialized project, like a newsletter or a show, that's a lot easier because it actually forces you to do that. So what's the most obvious question? Episode 1. Where does that leave you? More questions, more concerns, new avenues to explore, new ideas for episodes. So the switch here is to stop acting like an expert and start acting like an investigator. And if you're a student in particular, what an opportunity, because you haven't worked 25 years to harden and calcify the way you are. You're not juggling a million family and home life things yet, I hope. You are able to say, what am I actually curious about? So the process for me is simple. When you have something that frustrates you, that's the match that you've struck. You've struck the match and it's burning in your hand. And if you're on Twitter and you're tweeting about what frustrates you, that's kind of like you let the match burn all the way down and burn you. Like that's what Twitter is. The point of a match is not to sit there holding it, it's to do something with it. That's what creatives do. So you light the kindling. That's your curiosity. I don't like how this exists in the world, or I don't like how we always talk about this thing this way, or I don't like how every show is like this. That's the frustration. Why is it like that? What questions do you have? What's unanswered? Make stuff. And as you do that, as the kindling lights, it becomes this fire of creativity. So pursue curiosity. Forget about expertise. Stop acting like an expert and start acting like an investigator.
Tell me, what are your tips for working with people, with interviewees, especially interviewees who, might not be polished media professionals? Like, how do you put them at ease? How do you get their A material from them?
Yeah, I think about the 3 factors that go into a great conversation or interview, and we tend to over-index on 2 of them. That's the prep and the research, and the questions we ask. Now, forgetting for a moment that the leading question is less important than your follow-ups, right? Again, the curiosity you're pursuing as an investigator. Let's set aside research and questions you prep. It's really about the environment you create. And the environment starts with your first outreach and all the way through the moment you hit record. So I'll do things like, I won't make the moment I hit record a moment. I'll just be like, oh, let me hit record, get it out of the way. And then I'll just keep chatting with them and I'll cut out that fat. Or someone's really stiff. Maybe I notice I interview a lot of executives, so they might be really stiff. They're not performers, or they have their sound bites, or they've been coached by a PR person, sometimes in the room during the interview, which is crazy. Someone in their ear during the interview. It's like, we're not lawyers here. What's going on? Yeah. I'll drop the script, or I'll drop my plan anyway, and I'll ask a random question out of left field. And so questions I like to ask are like, do you have any pets? And people start joking. Do you have any kids? And people relax and laugh. Oh, I got 3 pets. It's kind of like having kids. That's the funniest thing ever. Let's keep going. Yeah. What's your last meal on earth? If you had to pick, what would be your last meal on earth? And people go, and they act like you want them to act. And I like to say to people, I just want to engineer your levels, because they don't necessarily know audio. I want to engineer your levels. So I'm going to ask you this question and take it out. What's your last meal on earth? And they laugh and they relax. And I say to them, I'm engineering your levels, but I'm not. I'm engineering them. I'm engineering the environment conducive to a great interview. So they will reflect the way you feel throughout the process. They will also need your cue. It's like a dance. Sometimes you want to lead them gently, sometimes very overtly. You don't know where they're going to go necessarily. You just want to make sure at all times you're in control. You're leading the dance, and the environment is a big, big part of that.
That's great. Okay. Now let's talk about once the recording session is done, you got your audio. The job isn't done because we still have post-production.
Oh yeah.
What advice can you offer us in terms of tackling that part of the creative process?
The episode format, having a rundown, is so paramount because you want to go shopping for good ingredients during the interview. That's what you do, whether you're telling a story or you're just publishing an end-to-end interview. When you're talking to the person during production, you're shopping for ingredients so that later you can cook a good meal. And so if you leave the store with terrible ingredients, there's only so much you can do in post, so to speak, to fix it. So what you want to do is have that plan heading in, right? The research, the questions, the environment, also the rundown of every type of episode you can typically publish. That's really important too. So when I go to post for a narrative show like Unthinkable, I get to start slotting things into this rundown, almost like I'm filling out a template. And I had an idea of the story heading in, and maybe it changes, and I jot that down like, oh, this changes. I'm going to jot it down because Joseph just said this, and I can tweak that later. So I'm kind of thinking like an editor throughout. And then later in post, I can move things around. But what you're doing is to have good ears, I think, is to pay attention to your own experience with the audio. If you're bored, your audience is going to be bored. If you're lost, the audience is going to be lost. If you're like, I like this moment, but it doesn't fit the overall story we're trying to tell, remove it, even if it's great. Yeah. In production, they call that killing your darlings. Yeah. Take out the stuff that you're precious about it. It's your darling. But if you had an editor, they'd say, this doesn't actually fit the story or the thesis, or it's out of bounds for the premise we're exploring. Just take it out. If you want to advertise it as bonus material for a subscription or something, great, but mostly just get rid of it. And so having the rundown dictate. So there's two things: the premise and the rundown dictates your edit. If you have neither, it's chaos. It's total chaos. And even then it's really, really difficult. The Creative Radio Lab likes to say that sometimes the edit is like wandering through the jungle and you're never sure how you're going to get out. And then you do, and you look back and you're like, oh, I'm glad that's over. And then you get back into a jungle the next episode. So even the biggest pros, a lot of it is trial and error for everything.
That's awesome. All right. Now we are in, we're almost finished our free hour. Which is like the period of time when this is recorded.
And I have a hard stop at 1:30, so I apologize.
Oh, good. Okay, so then just let's wrap it up there, just so we can just so I can thank you offline and all that. So Jay, before we go, for anybody who is watching the video and wants to look more at what you do, can you just tell people where to find you?
Yeah, just jayacunzo.com. And the most popular place I interact is through my newsletter or on Twitter. But jayacunzo.com links to all my projects.
Jay Acunzo from Unthinkable Media. It was a real pleasure. Thank you very much. We're going to end the live stream in a moment. All right. Okay, the live